Welcome to The Screen Queen, where I'll be talking about your favorite movie or your favorite TV show. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show. As always, my name is Samantha Parrish, and you are listening to your female Tarantino, The Screen Queen. So before I get into the episode, I want to make a personal note about what happened during the original recording of To Kill a Mockingbird. I struggled immensely with the episode, and I was pretty vocal about it on social media, talking about how it was making me feel and that I just wasn't getting to where I wanted. Typically, a Screen Queen episode will take me about 2 days to record. I was recording that episode for about 6 days. I just wasn't landing on the spots that I wanted to with the episode. And as everything progressed, I was going to go ahead and send out the episode anyway, even though I didn't feel the best about it. And then at the last possible minute, I had a major technical error that happened to the entire episode. Somehow, the individually edited pieces of the episode were scrambled in different parts. Like parts in the middle were at the beginning, parts at the beginning were near the end of the episode. It was the worst thing that could have ever happened in my whole history as a podcast host. But as much as it made me mad, I knew that it wasn't going to solve anything to sit here and be mad, and I'm not going to waste any more time trying to play puzzle pieces with this episode. So I decided to scrap the whole thing again, start fresh, and get it out here. But with everything going on, I just wanted to say a thank you to those that have been very patient with me during this time as I went through some troubleshooting as well as the technical errors. So, thank you for listening to that. It was something that I honestly needed to share because this was such a strange thing to happen for this episode. But now that the strangeness is over, it's time to get into the episode. So they say that it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. But it's also a sin to not love this movie. There are some films that we've got over time that tend to feel overhyped or they lose their value. To Kill a Mockingbird is one of those immortal films that you can watch over and over again and still feel the lessons. Even some of the minor flaws in this film do serve as a lesson, almost becoming a full circle self-aware film. For a film in 1962 that's set in the 1930s, told from a woman who had witnessed all of this as a child and talked about this in her book, it speaks a lot of volumes. Harper Lee became one of the voices of a generation that followed into the further generations. My grandfather's generation, my mom's generation, my generation, and soon Gen X. The words of Atticus Finch has resonated for many years. This film is officially 62 years old, and there is a lot of ground to cover, so here we go. So during the original recording process for this episode, I was stumped on how I wanted to start this episode. And then it came to me that the best way to start this episode is the woman that started it all, and that's Harper Lee. Now, there's something that I learned about Harper Lee that changed the way that I saw To Kill a Mockingbird. We don't normally think about where our storyteller was when they were writing the book. Like, I can tell you when I was writing Inglorious Inc. that I was dealing with depression and dealing with a lot of very different traumas in my life. And for Harper Lee, she was helping with another book. She contributed to Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. And if you've ever seen the film Capote, you do get that timeline within that film when she's referenced and they say, hey, how's that bird book going? And then you see how things transpire in the years to come, where they also mention the premiere of the film To Kill a Mockingbird. And Now, don't entirely quote me on that because it is fiction and some things probably reworked for Hollywood, but still, they did mention To Kill a Mockingbird, and they probably didn't have to do it, but it was nice, though, just to show how Harper Lee had to juggle all of these different tasks at hand, but she still wanted to get her story based on her town onto the big screen. It's very inspiring that through all that she still wrote this book and she got it out there. But the biggest thing of them all is what happened on the set of To Kill a Mockingbird. And this was one of the pieces of trivia that I wanted to share first. And when I saw this, it just put a big friggin' smile on my face. So I'll paint the scene for you. Near the beginning of the film, when the kids are going to go greet Atticus, the neighbor, Mrs. Dubose, is yelling at the kids, Jim, it's Finch, you get back here right now, I'm gonna tell your father. And then Atticus has to do damage control and butter up Mrs. Dubose, so that way she can ease up a little bit. But then the kids are also just like, Dad, what are you talking about? And making some snide jokes. And then he kind of slaps the back of Jim's back, and then you see Atticus Finch look to the left. Harper Lee was laughing so hard that it caught the attention of Gregory Peck. So that moment is actually a blooper that it looks just natural, like he's looking at the garden, because Gregory Peck always had that way of flawlessly still staying in character without giving attention that something else is going on. I'm going to be gushing about Gregory Peck a lot in this episode. And in fact, I'm going to do some more of that right now because I need to just give the time to talk about Gregory Peck. A couple years ago, I got my hands on the 60th anniversary DVD of To Kill a Mockingbird, and I got to venture through some of the special features to learn more about the film. That's actually where I learned that piece of trivia I just told you. And there is a wonderful segment on there. It's called Excerpt from Tribute to Gregory Peck. This came out in, I want to say 2004, and it started out with his kids who all took the time to tell a story about their father. And one of the stories was how he came home from a movie and he told the kids, hey, grab your fishing gear, we're going to go fishing. And they would go on the lake for hours so he could have the time with his kids and know how their schoolwork is going, how are their hobbies going, what's going on in their personal life. Like, the separation that he had from Hollywood was such a respected thing that he always felt genuine. He never came across as a Hollywood man, even though he looks very prestigious, but he's kind of like someone you'd see walking down the street. Like, he'd probably stop and say hi to you. That was the kind of man he was. So when I see him as Atticus Finch, he's basically playing himself. There's a reason why this film is one of his most well-known, is because you get prime Peck in that. He poured everything into there. Gregory Peck was a man of morals and values, and it's equivalent to a character like Atticus Finch, who holds a high standard for morals and values, that he judges someone on the way that they treat others, not because of the color of their skin, not because of what they have, but the integrity that you hold. The way that his daughter talked about him in that tribute, it completely makes sense why he felt so believable when he talked to Scout and Jem, because he treated those kids like his own. He gave lessons to us that have lasted a lifetime. He gave us advice that doesn't feel shallow. In a way, he played Atticus Finch like he was a father to all of us. Like when he talks to Scout on the porch and explains to Scout about how life is very unfair and that she's not wrong, but that she has to learn certain social cues, and the way that he gave that lesson in a way for her to understand without letting her feeling bad. That's the kind of lessons that last a lifetime. And Gregory Peck truly did bring Atticus Finch to life because he is a real-life Atticus Finch. And I feel like that's the best way to segue into how Atticus Finch has influenced a generation for 62 years.
Even though this was a story from Scout's point of view, and then it was made into a film that's more than just Scout's point of view.
But Atticus is the one that people look forward to seeing more. I mean, given the fact that he's played by a very well-known actor, but there are many layers to Atticus's character, and I like the fact that Gregory Peck played him in a way that you could tell Atticus was digesting what was going on. He was a man that did the right thing, but wasn't afraid to be wrong. Atticus is a good problem solver in the way that he can bring a problem to someone's attention and help them learn in their own way that they find their own answer. There's a couple of scenes that I want to call up. One of them that I just mentioned where Scout is very upset why she's being in trouble for calling out what's been going on with the Cunninghams because she found out that things are not so great for them. So in her mind, she thinks she's kind of helping. But then she gets her feelings hurt when she doesn't realize she didn't take the proper social cues. And Atticus had a way of telling her some of those social cues. And it happened later on again in the movie when Scout had got one of the biggest lessons of her life from her father about social cues when Cecil Jacobs, the unknown character that keeps pissing off Scout, used the N-word. And when Scout said the N-word, Atticus said, "Scout, don't say that." And explained to her why it's bad to say that. Atticus had a way of teaching people that you can still be kind, but you can't forget your identity. You have to hold your morals and values, and if you're going to call someone out, you need to have all your evidence prepared. In a way, he dealt with many things with some of the various stuff he's had as a lawyer, but a majority of the stuff is just the decisions he makes as a person, which makes him a great father and a great lawyer because you see how he applies that logic of life to both of those. So then, here was the wild complaint about a character that has great morals and values. Roger Ebert of Siskel and Ebert wrote a review that he saw Atticus Finch as a white savior character. And I don't believe that at all. When I was doing my research, I have to say I'm not surprised. This was something that did cross my mind with the way that I looked at the character of Atticus Finch and know that someone would try to see it like that. And I'm not surprised that someone like Roger Ebert would say that as well, to make such a strong statement about this film that, yes, you could see on the outside, but once you know the film on the inside, it doesn't match that. For a film set in a time period that equality was not there yet. I mean, shit, if you look today, we still don't have the best equality all around the boards of sexuality, racial issues. I had a conversation with my friend Faye about this, so I wanted to bring that up into how it pertains today. You don't normally have a character like Atticus Finch in a time like the 60s to talk the way that most of us do today, where we're more quieter, we're more reserved, but we don't let bigotry run our lives like it used to. Oh, it's still around. But thankfully, we have some of the graces of Atticus Finch to know how to treat certain situations and how to treat others with decency. Atticus was decent to everybody and didn't think he was getting something out of it. All he wanted to do was help somebody. He believed in the truth. That's the way his character's always been. Atticus is a perfect example of people in the South that didn't have to believe in the bigotry. And I know that because my grandfather's from the South and racism was just, unfortunately, as easy as breathing down there. So while I'm thinking about it, I would like to go ahead and segue into the book to film because I know my listeners have been waiting for this point. Now, I do need a preface. I haven't read the book. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but I mentioned that vehemently because of the fact that that does put me at a disadvantage to give a fair review to the book because if I haven't read it, then I can't talk about something that I don't know. However, there is some stuff in the Cliff Notes that has been brought to my attention, so I can give some valid points on book versus film. The first point that I found out was within the character of Mrs. Dubose, that she had a larger role in the book, and then comparing it to the film, she only shows up one time, just to know that she exists, and that she is the old lady that doesn't like the way Jem and Scout ignore her. In the book, Jem spent some time with her at the order of his father, and during the time that he was helping Mrs. Dubose, he learned that she wasn't all as bad as she was made out to be, but there was something else going on in her life that she doesn't tell people, and it's that she has an addiction to morphine. And you already have a book that has racial issues, Great Depression, and then sliding in addiction. Oh, that would be so much to tax. Like, I applauded for it. I also have so many themes within my book in Glorious Inc., but then to look at that from an audience point of view, like, that's a lot. Now, this next one, this is more of an implied note that's been made in both the book and it extended into the film. There is a implied incestuous relationship between Mayella and Mr. Ewell. So, from what we know about Mayella, she's at the center of what transpires with the story and the whole trial of Tom Robinson because she lied. But when you look at her facial expressions, they look terrified. She doesn't look ashamed. She doesn't look angry. She just looks terrified. And the fact that Mr. Ewell has to constantly have her right with him, like, it's a huge sense of control that can definitely be interpreted in different types of psychological abuse, especially with some parents that become abusive towards their children. I mean, there are definitely several different types of abuse that you can take away from this, but that is one implied note that I can see, because Tom Robinson is at the center of this. He knows that there's something going on because he said in the trial, I always felt sorry for her.
And all Mayella does is cry. She could have rebuked him once more. She could have made up another lie, but she just collapsed in the pressure of what was going on. That this was a man that she did try to seduce. She did a no-no. She was pushed away and unfortunately just unraveled into this whole clusterfuck of an event into a town that was easy to decide the fate of a black man. Mayella is right smack dab in the center where a lot of the things that transpired is solely because of what she did. But even after all that, Tom still felt sorry for her. He could have said anything at that moment. But the way he said, I felt sorry for her, it does speak on that implied point.
But on top of that, when we see Mr. Ewell, he is not afraid to hurt anybody. He was willing to hurt Atticus Finch's children. There was the way that he looked at Scout a little too creepily. So, unfortunately, that implied point starts to feel a little bit more valid despite not having, like, the concrete evidence of it. But all the factors, they do lead to that feeling more real. But again, that's just implied. So I want to make a hard transition to the director of this film, because the director doesn't get talked about enough. Robert Mulligan brought this film to life in the best way possible. I mean, I dare even say this might be the best book-to-film adaptation, despite what I just mentioned that had to be either implied or scrapped. But it is the most on par. No one has ever faulted the pace of this film, the way that's brought to life. And Robert Mulligan carried that career for many years. But here's the ironic thing. I watched this one film of his years ago called The Man in the Moon, which, as a bonus fun fact, that's Reese Witherspoon's first film. And when I was watching it, I was like, this feels a lot like To Kill a Mockingbird. And this was before I even realized that I was watching one of Robert Mulligan's films. If you were to sit down and have a double feature of To Kill a Mockingbird and The Man in the Moon, you will find that these two movies pair very well together, but Man in the Moon never feels like it's ripping off To Kill a Mockingbird. It still has a unique identity, but it's nice how it's very obvious it was influenced by To Kill a Mockingbird. The same way that I felt about the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird was the same way I felt about the characters in The Man in the Moon. It's not even close to Kill a Mockingbird, but it's nice that Robert Mulligan loved working on this film so much that it's imprinted into a majority of the films that he worked on, and that's not bad. To be influenced by a timeless film that has good morals and carrying that on, it's a nice takeaway from a film that you know you can put out there and that it's always going to have positive messages. That's very rare for many directors. When I put the timeline together to see that this was the last film he did before he retired and would live a quiet life and pass away, it's such a fitting end to have his career go out the same way that it started. That he made a wonderful book to film adaptation, and to carry all of that impact into a final film that kind of feels like the 90s version of To Kill a Mockingbird. Like, he basically gave a generation that chance to experience what people had with To Kill a Mockingbird. I do not know if that is exactly what happened. I just can't help but see the parallels because, of course, it's what I do. It's why I'm a movie buff. There's a way that people have had to experience To Kill a Mockingbird, and like I just mentioned, that I didn't get introduced to Kill a Mockingbird from the book, but I did get the chance to experience reading the play of To Kill a Mockingbird.
I remember there were about 4 plays that we covered, but To Kill a Mockingbird was one of the only ones I remembered, and obviously for good reason. And when I was thinking about that moment in time, I don't remember my classmates complaining about it. There were a lot of plays that we complained about, but the one thing that we enjoyed about our drama teacher was that he let us say the cuss words, but this was one of the first times that a story made an impact without anyone having to say a word.
But then in the years to come, I got the opportunity to experience To Kill a Mockingbird again on the TV screen. The network USA, which was one of the networks that I watched a lot as a child so I could catch all my crime shows, they did a special presentation of To Kill a Mockingbird with limited commercials, and I was like, holy shit. I've only rarely seen a couple of networks have to go out of their way to make the feature have as little commercials as possible. It's such like a nice detail that a network wants you to experience this, and they're doing whatever they can possible for you to feel as if you're watching this in the theater, so you're not away from these characters for very long. And when I got the chance to watch it on USA, like, it truly did feel like I was at the movies.
I hate to say it like this because it's going to make me sound old, but the younger generation is never going to know what that felt like to wait for a movie to come on TV like you were waiting for an event. Nowadays, you can stream it anytime you want. But when you got the time and the network to tune in for a film and just had it centered that you were just watching it and not thinking about rewatching it, just keeping it solely as an event, it is the highlight for many millennials getting to enjoy the premiere of something like that. You don't have to overdo a good thing. And USA didn't do a lot of older films, so they were going on a special note to provide something that they wouldn't normally show. It was just a nice moment in time.
So the next thing on my list is something I don't want to forget because this almost happened in the original recording, but I want to talk about some of the minor trivia. I don't have a proper placement for these, but I do not want these to go unheard. So the first thing I want to talk about, it's actually the most shocking, is that the child actors Mary Bedham and Philip Alford, they didn't get along. I mean, they're kids. Kids kind of have a knack for just having this honest distaste for one another. But to their dedication, they did bring the most authentic siblings. I can't see any other kid playing Scout and Jem but these kids. They did such a great job with the way that you felt that these kids were learning the lessons and the way that they were looking out for one another. The chemistry might not be there, but their dedication definitely shows. And that kind of makes up for the fact that you're not seeing chemistry. But then there's the other piece of trivia. Now, I mentioned Truman Capote earlier. Truman Capote is the inspiration behind Dill because Harper Lee and Truman Capote were best friends once upon a time. And if you watch Capote or the show Capote versus the Swans, and then turn around and watch To Kill a Mockingbird, oh my god, it's so obvious. The mannerisms, and I find it so ironic because the actor who plays Dill is also an openly gay man. So in a way, it was kind of meant to be for that actor to play Dill. But in a way, it's kind of sad that that's the only connection that you'll ever have with Truman Capote and Harper Lee, because their friendship unfortunately dissolved when Truman became a full-blown alcoholic. And if you've seen the show, then you know why Harper Lee had to make a hard exit from that friendship.
But then there's another piece of trivia that I found just now that I couldn't resist to share. Brock Peters, who plays Tom Robinson, delivered the eulogy for Gregory Peck's funeral and burial on June 16th, 2003. Now, I know that Gregory Peck touched the hearts of many people. He even still had a solid relationship with Mary Bedham, who played Scout, and they continue to call themselves Scout and Atticus in each other's presence. But to hear that another star from the movie was there for the funeral, it never phases to warm my heart. Like, every single thing I learn about this film just makes me feel better about life. But then here's the wildest piece of trivia of them all. The courtroom scene is not filmed in an actual courtroom. The courtroom that the producers wanted was unavailable. They wanted the old Monroeville County Courthouse in Monroeville, Alabama. But they couldn't get the rights, so they decided, hey, let's make our own right here in Hollywood. So you have a film that's set in Alabama, but it's not really filmed in Alabama. But I like how they paid attention to the aesthetic. It looks like you're walking right into Alabama. They do have the pictures up on Wikipedia so you can see for yourself for the inspiration of the design and then seeing the actual design. And they did later on use that same courthouse for the theater adaptations of To Kill a Mockingbird. And that seems like the best segue to get into what I find to be the most speechless part of the film, the courtroom scene. I've seen my fair share of court films. There are many that I hold to a high prestige for the way that you see Law and Order conducted. One of my favorites is A Time to Kill, and it's still A Time to Kill, but To Kill a Mockingbird it leaves you speechless with how Atticus talked to a room full of people that were ready to lynch a man that did nothing wrong except exist in a place that was against him. Everything was at stake for this court case, and Atticus Finch walked everyone through it. Atticus was it was as if he was holding a mirror to people to make them look at themselves and realize that they were about to indict a man on a rape charge, and the people telling the story have stories that don't add up or match up, even when the proof is given right there about how in the world was Mayella strangled with both hands when Tom Robinson has a busted hand, having to tell a whole courtroom full of people that this is bullshit. We're going from this being a coming-of-age story to a courtroom drama, and it needs to have that transition. It needs to have that moment where all the cards are on the table, all the chips are down, we're seeing Atticus Finch in his prime. But whenever I look at this courtroom scene, I define it as Atticus Finch won a lost case. Even though he walked around a whole courtroom full of people to show them the deceit behind the lies, it just wasn't enough. There are 12 jurors, and not a one of them would have made the choice to say not guilty. It is the South. Unfortunately, bigotry was the way of life back then. I would know. My grandfather's from Alabama, so he can confirm that for me. It is a tragedy that Atticus gave his all to a case where no one was going to make the choice of saying not guilty. The proof is right there. But if any one of those jurors had said not guilty, something bad could have happened to them. When you look at the way that Atticus was treated just for being nice to Tom Robinson, who knows what could have happened to them. It is a film that shows the raw side of the way the reality was, but at the same time, people that had to play their kindness very carefully for others that were not going to see it as kindness because no one was willing to change their mind for a different mindset. And this being a film in 1962, to show that glimpse of what's going on, it became one of the ways people could look at themselves and go, what are we doing? Why are we being unkind to someone for having a different skin color? But even though this was a case that went in vain, it was not forgotten about the hard work that Atticus put into this case. At the very end, when all of the colored crowd on the second floor was standing up, even the reverend who was looking after the Finch family had said, Jem, your father's leaving. You got to stand up. You get the full weight of why we're here. You can have an issue where you don't get the happy ending. You don't win the case. You don't get what was desired. But that someone sees the hard work that you did. They will never forget how Atticus gave 110% to this case. Atticus was a kind man in an unkind world, and he had to deal with the rawest part of his career to defend someone, knowing that it was going to divide the whole town. Stakes were already high enough with the fact that the Great Depression was going on. He was juggling so many things. When you look at this film, you really do see the layers that Atticus went through. But at the same time, with Atticus being a fictional character, it did catch the attention of several chambers that saw the way that Atticus was presented as a fair lawyer, but that he did everything that you would see a lawyer do. It is so rare to see a character in the realm of the legal world actually feel like someone who knows what they're talking about, that knows what to do. And it's because it's not that hard to be a decent person. This is one of those rare court cases that, yes, is so ugly and so raw to see how bigotry blinded so many people. But that you saw Atticus was carrying the fairness all the way through. There's so much weight on his back for what he had to do. The best way to end this segment is to cite one of the lines said by the character Maudie when she said, "There are some men born to do unpleasant jobs for us." And she's right. She's 100% right. And then I'm sure we're familiar with the very last-minute horrific climax to the story about what happened to Jem and the grisly fate of Mr. Ewell. But you would think with the story wrapping up with Scout's narration and finally getting the answer to Boo Radley, as well as leaving with a more enlightened sense of the world around her, that seems like a good way to wrap up the story. Except there was more. There was a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird called Go Set a Watchman. This was set in the 1950s. Scout is still the narrator. Bigotry is still as bad as ever. And now we have to see how the words of Atticus Finch have echoed into a new time period where bigotry has gotten even worse. Racial tensions are worse. When I was reading about this sequel, I kind of wondered, well, why in the world has no one ever heard of this? This is one of the most famous stories that has echoed for 62 years. And it's because it wasn't published until 2015. And to put it even more in perspective, Harper Lee died in 2016, so she did this within the year before she died. It is remarkable that she put this out. But the fact that she had to sit with this for so many years, and many of you are familiar that I've also had to republish my book, so I've been sitting on Inglorious Ink since 2017. But that just takes the cake for how long she was holding on to this story. I mean, this is her book baby after all. This is her world. This is her life that is being equivalated into a fictional form. And I'm glad that she published it, but it does make me wonder what the future is going to hold for the sequel of Ghost at a Watchman. I haven't seen too many reviews about it, but it wouldn't surprise me if it will eventually make its way in the school systems if the schools haven't banned To Kill a Mockingbird yet. And then I thought, well, what would the film look like for Ghost at a Watchman? And I don't want to think about that. To Kill a Mockingbird doesn't feel the same without Gregory Peck. It doesn't feel the same without Mary Bedham. Doesn't feel the same without Philip Alford, keep messing his name up. Doesn't feel the same without John Megna. None of it. I mean, the cast made the story. Harper Lee loved all the actors that went into this film. That's very rare for an author to give not only a stamp of approval, but continuing praise into something that continued her work in a different limelight. But the way that others have talked about it too, it just exists as it is for how it's echoed through time and the way it's going to continue to echo through time. Somehow To Kill a Mockingbird has always landed with someone, and it was meant to be. This is a story that changes someone's life, and you don't forget Scout and Jem and the words of Atticus Finch. So I want to end this episode talking about some of the lessons that Atticus Finch gave us. He taught us to walk a mile in someone's shoes. He taught us that it's easy to be ignorant, but it's also easy to be kind. He taught us the social graces of social cues. Even though he is played by a Hollywood actor, but that Hollywood actor resonated those words that it could follow us for the rest of our lives. So they do say it's a sin to kill a mockingbird, but it's a sin not to love this movie. And that is a wrap on the Redux episode for To Kill a Mockingbird. This was a lot. I'm very proud of how this episode turned out. This was truly a cursed episode with what I went through with the material. But no matter what I went through in this episode, something always worked out. I'm very proud of the way that I handled the stress of this episode, and I appreciate the friends that have helped me out with this episode. And thank you for your patience. And now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen. So I have my little box of suggestions right here, and we're going to find out together. So let me mix these up. Let me have nothing fall out of here again. Oh, no, there it went. See, told you. Okay. Let me pick from the bottom. Oh, I got one. Nope, I got like 3,000 in my hand. Just need the one. Okay, there we go. What are you? Show me your secrets. Oh my. We have a very intense film in my hands. And this is one that I know that I've been wanting to talk about. So the next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be Swallow. I'm going to tell you one thing. That film was a tough one to swallow. We're going to get into the next episode. But until then, if you want to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. If you also want to talk about how you love To Kill a Mockingbird and what your story is and how you found this timeless tale, I'd love to hear about it. Also, The Screen Queen is now available on YouTube. I've heard my friends talk about how they were looking for another way to listen to the show, and now it's available on there. And if you're interested in the small town series that I wrote, you can find it in the description box. Alrighty, you all take care now. Stay amazing, stay positive. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!